There's a well-known story with Friedrich Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and a chassid by the name of Rabbi Shmuel the Wittman. He was sent by the previous Rebbe to Chicago as a shadar, which was a regular activity in which he engaged, which meant basically he would travel from place to place on behalf of the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. And as the old expression that goes all the way back to the Mittler Rebbe is, Sehen Ruchnius und Schneiden Gashmius. He was a fundraiser. He had to raise money for the causes of the Rebbe, Merkez, and so on. But he wasn't meant to be only a fundraiser. His work very much involved Sehen Ruchnius, to leave an imprint, to leave an impression, to inspire people to be better Jewish people as part of his mission. So he would go to different places and he would meet people, he would talk to them about Yiddishkeit, and would also raise money for the Rebbe. One of the places he visited was Chicago. Chicago then in the 1940s was the Likutei Torah Yisrael. I'm not saying it isn't an Likutei Torah Yisrael now, but then Chicago may have been the most Jewish city in America, perhaps even greater than New York, but it was a very, very Jewish town with many, many, many shuls and a lot of activities and so forth. And Rabbi Shmuel went probably with another chassid to Chicago. Of course, in Chicago there already was a Lubavitcher shliach by the name of Rabbi Zalman Hecht alav hashalom, who would greet them when they arrived and help them in their work of meeting Jewish people and Zeyin Ruchnius and Schneiden Gashmius, to plant seeds of spirituality and to harvest, to bring back the wealth, the material wealth needed for the Rebbe to do the work that he was busy doing. On one of his trips to Chicago, we got a very strange instruction from the Friedrich Rebbe, that he should go to the home of a particular man and he should not take a check. He shouldn't ask for money, and he shouldn't even accept it if it's offered. And instead, he should make a fabrengen. This person was quite well-to-do, or perhaps very well-to-do. He was a rich man. And you're talking now the 40s. The Jewish people then, the Libam Eir, American Jews especially, were very, very generous, incredibly giving when it came to matters of tzedakah. I remember the Rebbe said once by a fabrengen, this is a quote, "Der Eibishter dat geschickt Jiden in Amerika, sie sollen poshet machen asach Geld." God Almighty sent Jewish people to America, they should simply make lots of money. And that money saved the Jewish people after the war and when Eretz Yisrael was liberated and so forth. So this Jew was used to writing checks, to giving tzedakah to all kinds of organizations. And Rabbi Hecht called him, Rabbi Zalman Hecht, the local Lubavitcher, called him and asked if they could come over and see him, and he said yes. And his understanding was that he would write a check. When they arrived, they asked if they could make a fabrengen. So he said, "What's a fabrengen?" He says, "Well, a fabrengen needs vodka, some crackers and herring, which they supplied, and they would sat around." I would imagine that this Jew may not have been from, but I'm sure he spoke Yiddish. Sat and listened to Rabbi Shmuel sing a niggin and tell a story, an avart. And they had a fabrengen. How long the fabrengen lasted, I don't know, whether it was a half an hour, or 2 hours. This Jew and his entire family, his wife and his children, had never seen a fabrengen before. They probably did not relate very well to the fabrengen, but this is what the Rebbe said: a fabrengen is a fabrengen. And when they got up to leave, again this person offered them a check, and they said, "No, this time we're not here for a check. We came to leave and not take, to give and not to take, just a fabrengen." So this person said to the Shmuel, with all due respect, "People come to my home all the time. No one ever makes a fabrengen. Everybody leaves with a check. What's the meaning of a fabrengen, and why won't you take a check?" So the Shmuel told this Jew a mashal. The mashal he told him, the analogy, the illustration that he gave him, was from the traveling seifrim of old. In Europe, in Eastern Europe, there were parts of Eastern Europe, and during certain times, that the Jewish people lived very, very scattered, very dispersed. Pardon me. That in many places they did not live in large communities. There were many, many Jews who didn't have a minyan for Shabbos. They would gather together for Yom Tiv or for Yom Neroim to make a minyan, because they were very, very, very scattered, very dispersed. Now, if you lived in a shtetl, assuming you had a minyan, you obviously could not afford a full-time sheichet. There was not enough chickens or animals for him to shecht, and you could not afford a full-time sefer. There was not enough work for him to do. So the Shachtim and the Safrim were constantly traveling. They had a whole circuit where they would visit many, many villages over the course of a series of months and do shchita and do safros and do whatever needed to be done. And that's how they made a living, and that's how the Jewish communities were able to survive. The problem, of course, was that when it comes to shchita, they had no refrigeration, so they probably had to use salt, which Poland is very famous for its salt mines, but I don't know. But when it came to safros, they had a different problem. The problem was that the town had one Sefer Torah, and let's say the Sefer Torah became a puzzle. They couldn't use the Sefer Torah until the Sefer came again, which could have been months. So the minig was that when the Sefer would pass through town, he would look through the Sefer Torah from the point where they were reading it then until the point of his next visit. And any time he saw a letter that was fading, he would blacken it, he would fill it in. In other words, he would correct letters that had not yet become problematic so that they should not become a problem while he was en route, while he was someplace else. This was part of the Sefer's, the traveling Sefer's job. He'd come to town, he'd look through the Sefer Torah and blacken in the Yossi those letters that may have still been kosher, but were beginning to fade so they shouldn't crack before his return. So Rabbi Shmuel continued, and he said to this balabos, said to this Jew, that every Jew was a letter in the Sefer Torah, like it says in the Sefer Magal HaMukis, that the word Yisrael is an abbreviation for Yesh Shishim Ribu Yossi Es La Torah. There are 600,000 letters in the Torah, which correspond to the 600,000 original neshamas that left Egypt when the Jewish people became a nation. And we're, of course, all sparks of those neshamas, and every Jew has a letter in a Sefer Torah. So the Rebbe says, every Jew's letter, there's Rabbi Shmuel said, every Jew's letter in Sefer Torah is permanent, but they could fade. It could become grayish. It could even crack. So you have to have a Yid who travels around, who blackens in, who fills in, who darkens the fading letters of the Sefer Torah. And Rabbi Shmuel said that's what a fabrengen is. A fabrengen is you come to a Jewish person who is very, very Jewish, and you crispen, you make sharper and stronger his identity as a Jew. This is what Rabbi Shmuel told this balabas. On his return to New York, he went into the previous Rebbe to give an account, to tell the story of his trip. And he shared many details with the previous Rebbe, and one of the things he told the Frierdiker Rebbe was this, that he'd been in the home of this Yid, and he made a fabrengen, and he didn't take a check as per the instructions. But this Yid asked, what is the purpose of a fabrengen? He didn't relate to it, his wife didn't relate to it, his children couldn't understand it. So Rabbi Shmuel gave him the analogy of blackening the oisius of a Sefer Torah. So when Rabbi Shmuel finished telling this to the previous Rebbe said the mashal is good. It's a correct mashal, it's a precise mashal, except for one detail. And the detail that's incorrect, said the Rebbe, is that you compared every Jew to oisius haksav, to written letters. When in reality a Jewish person is taka a letter in a Sefer Torah, but what kind of Sefer Torah? Oisius hachakika, letters that are carved. And a letter that is carved can never fade, because the letter is imprinted, is indented in the stone itself. And there's no way for the letter to fall out because the stone has become part and parcel of the Yossi itself. The Yossi has become part and parcel of the stone itself. So there's no way for such a letter to become faded. It's only possible that the indentation, the intrusion into the stone should get filled with dust. And as a result of the fact that it's filled with dust, it doesn't glisten, it doesn't shine. So somebody comes along and blows on the letter and extracts, dislodges the dust so that the stone should glisten, should shine more brightly. And the Rebbe explained the same is true when a shliach of the Rebbe Ashadar goes on a mission like this to awaken Yiddish and Neshamas. His effect and his purpose is to touch and rekindle the level of Yiddish and Neshama that exist on the level of Eisius Achakika, carved letters as opposed to written letters. This is the story with the previous Rebbe and Rabbi Shmuel. This is a segue to another idea, which the Rebbe, our Rebbe, discussed many times, both publicly and privately. You could see it also by the meetings that the Rebbe had with people during dollars. That in the world, in some communities, there is an expression, kiruv rechekim, to bring close those who are distant. Jewish people are lost, Jewish people are assimilated, Jewish people are Eretz Asher, Jewish people are Eretz Mitzrayim, the way it's explained in Chassidus, goals of Ashidus and goals of Anias. and they have to be rekindled, reawakened, brought back to their roots, brought back to their sharashim. And the tshuva movement and the kiruv movement is about kiruv rechekim, to bring those who are far away closer to HaKadosh Baruch. Whenever somebody would mention that term to the Rebbe would object. And the Rebbe would say there's no such thing as a distant Jew, there's no such thing as a rochik. A Jew is never far. You cannot call it kiruv rechekim, you must call it kiruv krevim, because there's no such thing as a Jew who's far away. It's only that there is a Jew whose closeness to the Eibishter becomes faded. You need to blow against the crack in the stone where the dust has collected to dislodge it, and the stone, the ice, the letter will begin to shine. Like the Rebbe would say to people all the time, you are not making a Jew Jewish. You are helping a Jew discover his own Jewishness. And the truth is, the Rebbe used to say the same thing even when he get to Agoy, and the obligation of the Bnei Neach, the sons of Neach, to keep the 7 laws of Neach. That the Rebbe would make the same argument that you're not giving somebody something which is foreign to him. You're giving somebody something which is part of his basic nature. That's how the Eibishter designed a Yid to keep Tayag mitzvahs. And that's how the Eibishter designed Lahav Lanene Yehudi Agoy, a Ben Neach, a Bo Eilam, that you keep the Sheva mitzvahs Neach. This is indicated in the Maimon Basi Legani, Tafshin Yud Gimel, where our Rebbe, the Rebbe says that for a Goy to violate his Sheva mitzvahs is the same Ruach Shtus as for a Jew to violate his Taryag mitzvahs. The point, in other words, is when you're coming to a Jew and getting him to do a mitzvah, you're not giving him something which he doesn't have. You're helping him uncover who he truly is. He's going back to his own roots. He's going back to his own essence. And the same is true lahav by an Einei Yehudi. When you get him to practice the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei neich, to be a Maimin ba'Kadosh Baruch Hu, and so forth and so on, you're giving him something which goes back to his basic nature. Uf kodasei yizbarech shamra arucham. And this is the philosophy of Kiruv of Lubavitch. The philosophy of Kiruv of Lubavitch, of course, which the Rebbe created, is based on the idea that every Yid is a neshama. And when you come to a Jew, and you talk to him about Yiddishkeit, particularly when you stop him in an airport or in a train station or on a street corner, and you're asking him to put on film, and remarkably he stops and agrees to do it and does it in fact. And it seems so odd, it seems so crazy. Why would a person who's secular and sophisticated stop in the middle of a street to put on film? And the answer is because you're not giving him something foreign, you're giving him something which is his basic nature. And when a Jew encounters his basic nature, it opens up the neshama and it creates this incredible clarity about what he must do. Like I've told you the story with the previous Rebbe, that the previous Rebbe was looking through some ksavim, and he identified which ones were kosher and which ones were not kosher, which ones were holy and which ones were not holy. And when the Chassidim told him there's Ruach HaKodesh, he said, no, it's not Ruach HaKodesh at all. So how does he know which page is a holy page, which page is not a holy page? So he said the following, a Yid is Getlachkeit. Und Getlachkeit, so Getlachkeit tzitzach, a Jew is godliness. And any artifact, any item which is godliness is also Getlachkeit. And there's a magnetism, there's a pull, there's a draw between one Ian of Getlachkeit and another Ian of Getlachkeit. So when I pick up a ksav, said the previous Rebbe, and I feel a strong kinship, I feel a strong relationship between myself and it, that I know it's Kedusha. And otherwise I know that it's Chayil. The reason for this introduction is because, of course, our Maamar is in Bechukosei Telechu, which is all about Eisei Hakika, carved letters as opposed to written letters. And in our Maamar, which discusses the difference between carved letters and written letters, you'll see Mitzvah Hashem in the next couple of Shiurim, he develops this both in terms of Torah. There's Eisei Hakika and Torah, which is like the Luchas Habris, the tablets of the witness and the covenant. And then there's the Eisei of the Sefer Torah, the letters of the Holy Scroll, which is the Chassidishe Parsha. And they represent Eisei Hakika and Eisei Saksiva in Torah. And later on, the Rebbe is going to say the same is true in a Yiddish Neshama. A Yiddish Neshama has two madregas, the way it's at the level of Eisei Hakika, and the way it is on the level of Eisei Haksiva. The different levels of the Neshama. But in the end, every Jew, even a Jew, is living on a more superficial level of his Neshama. Whether it's Ksav and so forth and so on, Bepnimius, inside, underneath all those layers, there's the madrega of Im Bechukosei Telechu, the madrega of a Hakika connection, a natural and innate and inherent and inner connection between Yid and HaKadosh Baruch. So before we get to today's class, and we're on line 366, 365, I want to develop further the concept of Eisies HaChakika and Eisies HaKsiva as an introduction to today's conversation. And I'm going to say this. When you learn Chassidus, and Chassidus, of course, discusses the pnimius of everything you have in Torah, one of the ideas that Chassidus talks about is the concept of Eisies HaChakika and Eisies HaKsiva and Eisies of Baal Peh, carved letters and written letters and oral letters. And of course, these three madreges, carved letters, written letters, and oral letters, correspond to the Eisies of the Luchas Abris, the letters of the tablets of the covenant, the Eisies of the Sefer Torah, letters of the Sefer Torah, and the letters of the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah, which is given of Baal Peh, the words of the Gemara, the Dvarim Shebal Peh, Atar Asher L'Keis from. You're not allowed to write them down. Now, first I'm going to give you fancy words, which are in and of themselves going to have little meaning, and then I'm going to develop it. Eisies HaChakika Kulei Ponim. The carved letters have only a face. There's no front and back. It's Kulei Ponim. Whatever side you looked at the luchis, top, bottom, right, left, there was Anich Hashem Elokecha written in order. The Eisies of Baal Peh, the letters of Torah Shebal Peh, or Kulei Ocher, are entirely rear, behind. And in this case, the meaning of Ocher is Seichel alone. Torah Shebal Peh is the intellect of the Eibishter, but the Ruach HaKodesh is missing. The Sefer Torah, the Torah Shebeksav, is Ksuva Ponim v'Ocher. Sefer Torah is in between the Eisies HaChakika and the Eisies of Baal Peh, and has a face and a rear. So you have three madregas. The Eisies HaChakika, the Luchas Abris, are Kulei Ponim. They're entirely face, frontal, there's no back. The Sefer Torah has a Ponim v'Ocher, a front and a back, and the Torah Shebal Peh is Kulei Ocher. These are three levels of Torah. God gives us His light. God gives us His life. God gives us His intellect and His wisdom and His will. And it descends from a higher level to a lower level through these three basic levels. First, carved letters, which is Kulei Ponim, and then written letters, which is Ponim and Achirayim, and then spoken letters, which is Kulei Seichel, Kulei Ocher, it's the lowest madrega. So I wish to explain to you these three levels of Eisies HaChakika and Eisies HaKsiva and Eisies Baal Peh by using a mashal, which, like I said to you before, we've already discussed all of this. Much of what we've discussed today, perhaps all of what we discussed today, has come up in earlier classes. And that is that you find in the Beis HaMikdash that there were three fires. And the three fires, which I'm going to describe momentarily, are going to correspond to the three types of Eisies, the three types of letters. There was the fire on the outer Mizbeach. There was the fire that burnt the Meneda and the oil on the Meneda. And there was the fire that burned the incense on the Mizbeach HaKtedas and the Mizbeach HaPnimi. What's the difference between these three fires? The fire on the Mizbeach burnt wood and meat. Now the wood was dry and fresh, but the meat was moist and fresh. So the Gemara says you had to have 60 measures of wood to burn one measure of meat. And the fire was incredibly well fueled, and it was therefore very hot. There was lots and lots of fuel that was burnt on the Mizbeach every single day. And the fire would dry out the meat. And once the meat was dried, the fire would consume the meat. So as a consequence, if you would visit the Beis HaMikdash and examine the fire on the outer Mizbeach, it would be very, very large. Maybe it's 100 square feet of fire space area, maybe more. And they fed it with enormous amounts of fuel, making it incredibly, incredibly hot. And they would throw on pieces of fresh meat, depending on the carbon, of course. And the fire would quickly dry the meat out and then consume it. But this fire was by no means peaceful. It was whistling and whizzing and cracking and popping and throwing things out of the fire. There was a draft that would push pieces of meat or wood from the fire. That's how hot it was and so on. It certainly was not a peaceful fire. At least it didn't look so peaceful. And the reason was basic, because the fire was burning something which is moist, which is wet. And of course, fluid, liquid, and fire are opposites. And therefore, the meeting between the fuel and the fire, even though there was so much fuel, that the consumption of the fire was probably, the consumption of the meat was fait accompli, for sure going to happen. But until it was completely burnt, it was very, very noisy. This is the fire of the outer Mizbeach. I'll get back to the Nimshal later. Then you have the fire of the Meneda. The fire of the Meneda was burning olive oil, pure olive oil, on a candelabra, and it was so peaceful. There was no whistling, there was no whizzing, there was no cracking, there was no popping, because there was no water. And if there was a drop of water in the menorah, it was no good. Pure olive oil, just olive oil. And here you had a fire sitting on a wick, immersed in fuel that would eat up the oil and rise up a beautiful and very, very peaceful light to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for many, many, many hours with no struggle, no resistance, and no problem whatsoever. So the fire of the menorah was quite different then. The fire of the Mizbeach, because the Mizbeach's fire was so noisy and tumultuous, the fire of the menorah was so quiet and peaceful and harmonious. But then there was a third fire. And the third fire was the fire of the Ketores, of the incense, where they make a fire, they put coals, they would sprinkle the incense on the coals, and there was no flame. The incense itself began to glow red hot. And of course it created a smoke, a steam, which wafted up into the air and freshened everything, like the Chazal tell us that in the entire city of Yerushalayim, Kala did not need to have herself perfumed, the Ketores perfumed her. This third fire, the fire of the Ketores, also was very, very peaceful, because the Ketores had to be incredibly, incredibly dry, ground very finely, as it says in the Chumash. And not only was it quiet and peaceful, there was actually no flame. The menorah at least produced flames that were attached to a wick, which was consuming a fuel in a very peaceful way. The Ketores was even deeper than that. The fire and the fuel became literally one. There was no flames. These were the three ishim, the three fires that burnt in the Beis HaMikdash. And what do they teach us in Aveda Ruchnis? What do they mean in spiritual terms? These three fires and their relationship to their respective fuels represent three levels. If we will call the fuel that they're burning, in one case it's meat and wood, in the other case it's olive oil, in the third case it's incense, worldliness. And the fire would represent the fire of Elokus, godliness. The meeting between the fire and this fuel will be a meeting between worldliness and godliness. And the nature of the meeting would be determined by the level of the worldliness. The meat and the wood, which burnt on the outer Mizbeach, represent worldliness on a level which still has moisture. Meaning to say, it still has an association with mayim, matzmichim, kol minei tainugs, the material delights of the world. And as a consequence, the interest of the moisture and the interest of the fire are opposite. The fire wants to consume it and to raise it up and to make it to a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the moisture wishes to be itself, wishes to exert, to express its desire for pleasures that are separate from a service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So eventually the fire wins, and it dries out the meat, and then it consumes it and raises it up and makes it into a carbon. But initially there's a struggle, because the fire is meeting a fuel which is incompatible with itself, and it has to overcome that conflict, that contradiction, that incompatibility, so that it could burn as it must to become one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the nimshal is that the fire of the outer Mizbeach is like the worlds, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, the lower three worlds. And the outer Mizbeach is Malchus of Atzilus, which meets the lower three worlds. In the lower three worlds there's Klippa. And in the lower three worlds, everything of Kedusha has a little bit of Klippa within it. And therefore, when something from the lower worlds are becoming attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it involves a conflict. Because the conflict within that entity which is being brought as a carbon, the moisture within that thing which is being given as a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, objects, opposes the fire eating it up and raising it up. And there's a struggle until the fire succeeds. The second is the fire of the menorah. That the fire of the menorah, of course, was burning fuel, which was attached to the flame by a wick, and it was completely peaceful because there was no moisture, there was no water here other than olive oil. And as a consequence, the olive oil was burning as almost as if the whole purpose which God created olive oil is to create lights and fire to be raised up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Very, very quiet, very, very peaceful, very, very harmonious. The only limitation that exists when burning olive oil is the fire and the fuel are separate. They're in two different places. The fuel sits in a cup, the fire hovers above it, and what connects the fuel which is in the cup to the fire is a wick. If you would put the fire, if you would immerse the fire directly into the fuel, it wouldn't burn. Which shows on an incredible degree of harmony between fuel and fire. But notwithstanding how harmonious it is, they're still two separated things, because the fuel is in one place and the flame is in another. And of course, the Nimshlis goes in the world of Atzilus, Eilam Atzilus, which is the world of Achtus. Eir and Kli, light and vessel, meet in a very perfect and harmonious way. But at least you have revealed light. Light separately and vessel separately, and the light is being revealed into the vessel. And the third madreg is the fire that burned the incense, the keteiros, where not only there was no noise, there wasn't even any flame. All there is glowing embers. Just like the coal, the red hot coal itself has no flame, there's just heat. When the keteiros is added to that coal, the keteiros itself becomes an extension of that heat and burns without any flames, like a cigarette, for example. And of course, the nimshal is that not only are the fuel and the fire in such a state of harmony, they literally join together and they become one. These three fires, the mashal of these three fires, correspond to Teresh B'Ksav, Luches Abris, and Teresh B'Ksav, and Teresh B'Alpeh. The oral Torah that we were given is Chochmasei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's the wisdom of God, and it explains everything to us on a level where we're able to understand it intellectually. And the Eibishter brought the Torah down to a level of intellect for the sake of birur. Because we're able to understand the Torah, we're able to understand what the Torah wishes to do to the world and changing it and making it home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu and so forth. But in so doing, the logic of the Torah has to descend to the level where the struggle exists. Like it's brought in so many Maamar Chassidus that in Likutei Torah you find lengthy discussions about Mali L'Shaker, to get into the mind of a liar and into a thief and into a crook, to understand what motivates him, to understand how he thinks, to figure out what lies he'll tell. On the basis of figuring out what lies he'll tell, we'll be able to determine whether in one instance he's telling the truth or lying. Like it's brought in the Hayem Yem about a woman who's accused of something and she's giving all kinds of explanations, whether she's entitled to some kind of financial recourse. So the Rebbe Marash asks, a woman is not a Tana, she's a simple lady. How can she figure out the Svaras, the Tanaim and Amiroyim in order to be able to extract a compensation, financial reward? So the Rebbe Marash answers, that itself is a raya, as a zachwa says, if it matters to you, you'll figure it out. But imagine the Torah dealing with liars and thieves and even murderers, and teaching us the halachas of how to apply the chokhmah of the Eibishter, which is from higher than the creation, to such a low level as leisitzach and leisignef and leisinaf and leisana and leisachmed, like we read in the Seres Adibris in the Shvuas from which we're coming. But that's the taich, Likutei Torah. It came all the way down to the lowest world that's involved in Avedis Abirurim. And in fact, in Tanya, in Kuntas Acharet, the Alter Rebbe suggests that simply learning Likutei Torah about matters in halacha, which are never going to happen in Metzias, like the Shilas of Kinim and the Sveikis of Ma'aseh Behema, and all these other situations which are so odd and so unusual and so unlikely to occur. The Machshavas Psul of Pigel, that the reason the Torah writes these halachas, even though they're never going to happen in the physical world, is because every time you are learning Likutei Torah that's addressing these questions, you are separating Klipa from Kedusha, doing a birur in the Ruchniyazdika worlds. But the way this takes place is because Likutei Torah is seichel, it's intellect. And you have to understand it. But it's only intellect. The oira laki, the godliness which is behind the Torah, you don't perceive, you don't feel. You just feel the logic and the svara and the debate and so on. And above Teresh B'Alpeh, which is kulei acher, which is all intellectual, all logical. You have Teresh B'Ksav, which is called ponim v'acher, has a front and a back. The Teresh B'Ksav, the chumish, is a combination of ruach hakodesh, of godly light, and seichel. Or to put it in plain words, the light of the Teresh B'Ksav is Ein Seif, and the vessel of Teresh B'Ksav is seichel. And Teresh B'Ksav is, so to speak, the meeting between godliness and worldliness. So in Teresh B'Ksav you have harmony and you have peace, because when the godly light reveals itself, so the world does not interfere, the world does not object. If you're coming to the world just with logic, the world is going to answer. We have a logic of our own. When the Torah comes to the world with its holy light, the world is in this battle, the world is melted, the world is bottled in the presence of that light. But the Teresh B'Ksav at least has two madreges, the level of Oir, which corresponds to the godliness, and the level of Keli, or Eisius, which corresponds to the worldliness. And the highest madrega of Torah is the Luchas Abris, the tablets of the covenant, where it's kulei panim, there's only face, there's no rear, there's no back. Like I said before, the Luchas Abris were not perfect cubes. The Gemara says that they were vav al gimel. They were 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim by 3 tfachim. Nevertheless, even the narrow side, any side of the 6 sides of the luchas that you would examine, you would read on Eichei Hashem Elokecha. And of course, this was an extraordinary ness, because the Eisis were ksuvim mishnei Evrei, through and through were carved. If you carve a letter on one side of a stone all the way through, on the opposite side, you should see the stone, the letter in reverse, inversely. In the Luchas Abris, they were carved all the way through, yet on every side that you read, there was a front. It was a ness, it was a nimnan, a noise type ness. Kulei panim. And the nimshal is, there's only godliness. There's godliness on such a level which doesn't even come down from the godliness to the level of worldliness, from the level of godliness to the level of seichel, level of understanding. And I once told you a story, and I don't want to delve into this story at length, so it's not for now, where the Rebbe Rashab asked a chassid a pshat and a maimed. And when the chassid said that Rebbe Rashab doesn't need his help to understand it, if it's a chayin keren on me, he'll figure it out by himself. So the Rebbe Rashab retorted, it's true, I could figure it out by myself. But the question that he had, the Rebbe Rashab's question was, is he understanding this idea, or is he seeing it as Ruach HaKodesh? When you learn a concept in Torah, and you're a Baal Ruach HaKodesh, sometimes you're not sure if you understand it or if you see it. So he asked it of a chassid, who did not have Ruach HaKodesh. And he would know whether, when the chassid understands it, that he is able to understand it intellectually. If the chassid cannot understand it, he cannot be sure whether his appreciation for that idea is because of his chokhmah, or because of his ruach hakodesh, and because of his nevuah. So there's 3 madregas in Torah. The level of Torah which is at war, which is pure seichel. The level of Torah which is totally peaceful, it's ein safe, it's godliness, the madrega of eisei hakika. And a level in between which joins together the godliness and the intellect. And now, after this very long introduction, let's get to today's class. Vezehu gamke, which is line 366. Klolus hahefresh, the difference in general, bein Torah shebeksav lemichtav haluchos, between the Sefer Torah, where the letters are written on parchment, and the writing which was carved into the Luchas Abris, into the tablets of the covenant. Now there's 2 aspects that you need to appreciate. And if you will, if you had to put this into words, I would say it, the difference between last week's class and the 2 classes before that would be this. Last week's class, we discussed primarily levels of oir. Torah is the God's wisdom. But before Torah is God's wisdom, it's God's light. As I explained it to you in last week's class, the 3 madregas of Eir, Chayes, and Keach. First, godliness is Ein Sof, then it comes down to a level of division and limitation, until it comes down into vessels and so on. So when you're talking about different levels of Torah, there's 2 aspects to the different levels of Torah. One is whether the letters are written or carved, and that was 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago. And the other is that when you have carved letters, the light which joins with the carved letter is a light, is a level of Torah, which is a madrega of Ein Seif. It's higher than understanding. On the other hand, when the light of Ein Seif descends into Atzilus, and it joins the vessels on the levels of Eisis Aksav, on written letters here, although the Ein Seif is coming down into Atzilus, into the Kelim of Atzilus, it comes down to a level where there's Seichel as well. So after having spent all this time setting up Eisis Aksiv and Eisis Hakika, and the Oir of Eisis Aksiv and the Oir of Eisis Hakika, the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe now concludes, V'zeu gamkin klaus ha'hefresh bein Torah shebeksav lemichtav haluchos. We now understand the difference in the written Torah and the letters carved into the luchas. The meaning of the written Torah, that the letters are written on a piece of parchment, one thing imposed on another. The parchment and the letter remain 2 separate things. They can become separated again. That be muk of gevil, like was explained earlier in the Maamar in brief. But in addition, there's also the light which rests, which manifests, which reveals itself on those written letters. Just like the letter is in addition to the parchment, the wisdom of the Torah, which reveals itself through that letter, is in addition to the letter itself. Torah, in essence, is above the written letter because it's Ein Seif. Ki Teira bebechinas Yisei, Dava Teira comes from Chochma, and Shadayin Yesh Beharas Ein Seif, which still has some trace of the Ein Seif. Now the truth of the matter is, there's levels of Teira and Keser, which are much higher than Yisei Dava. But even the level of Teira, which comes down to Chochma, is still above spoken and written words, Shemalubash Bekeser, that Ein Sof, which is manifest in Keser, has a Shayches with Chochma as well, Bechukosei, with the Parshas of Hashem Bechokosei. God Almighty shows himself in Chochma. V'nikra b'shem Eden. This is the level of Eden. Eden means delight. The place where godliness is revealed to worldliness in such a way that you experience the pleasure of the godliness rather than have some sense of comprehension or apprehension or understanding of the godliness. And that's what Torah is. Torah is light, Ein Seif, which is unified and infinite and above the world. And it's meeting vessels in order for it to reach us. And in the level of Torah Shebeksav, just as the letters are separate from the parchment, the light is going to be separate from the letters which is going to conduct. Rak, it is only Sheneslapsha, that the oir of Chochma, of Torah Shebeksav, reveals itself and is enclosed and held bebina, on the level of bina. Sheshamhu b'chinas Eisis, where you have actual letters, as we discussed in the previous classes, at the beginning of Eisis, Nikodes is in Machshava and Chitzeni is bin. V'hainu gan stodem de'erai, which is the Sefer Torah that we have, which is comprised of 53 orders of Torah, 53 Parshias. And of course you know there's actually 54 Parshias, if you count Nitzavim and Vayelech separately. So the Rebbe explains that Nitzavim and Vayelech are actually one Parsha, it's just that on occasion they're split, Pas Baga Melech. That the light of the Torah emerges from Eden, but when it descends to the level of the Nahar, the river, which means to reveal or to move, it manifests in written letters, so that now the godliness is more revealed and is revealed closer to us. But the cost of revealing the godliness from a higher level to a lower level is that there's a madrega of this Torah, which is not going to reveal godliness, but it's going to say, I want to understand. Chochmah. Which includes also these letters, which are the vessels. The light and the vessels join together. Similarly, the letters of the Sefer Torah and the eight of the Sefer Torah join and become one, but they become one on a level where the light is revealed in vessels. And of course, the nimshal for this is, I told you earlier, it's Atzilus, where Ein Sof is revealed, but Ein Sof is revealed in vessels, so that the chitzenis of the Ein Sof is Chachmas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Continues the Rebbe, line 374, on the Maluches, Shorsh Mebechinas HaKeser Elye. As opposed to the Luchas Abriz, the tablets of the covenant which come from Keser. And the meaning of coming from Keser is that the godly light which is revealed on those letters remains in the Madrega of Keser, even as they're revealed in the physical tablets. So the first thing is that the letters that are carved on stone, and they're specifically carved through and through, they're one part and parcel with the stone, they're not at all separate, represents how the Eisis of Maamar Eim soft, like was discussed in the previous classes. And number two, the godly light which manifests on these Eisis is also godliness on the level of Ein Sof, which does not come down to a level of worldliness, it's Kulei Ponim, it's all Ein Seif. Says the Rebbe, and the notion of carved letters, as opposed to written letters, the notion of the Torah that exists on a level of Ein Seif, which is pure oil, altogether higher than Chayas, a level of learning and appreciating Torah where you experience the Ein Sof of the Torah, and you have no connection to the Chochmah of the Torah whatsoever. That's what Aseret HaDibros was. And the Luchas Abris are Shanit, Nu B'Chag HaShavuos, that were given on Shavuos. Lefi, because we know from Kabbalah, Sha'azu is Gal Sam Shachas HaKesem. Because Shavuos is a Yom Tov, when Keser is revealed, as I mentioned to in a previous class, each Yom Tov has a different revelation. That Chanukah Purim is Netzach and Hoid. Chodesh is Chagas. Yom Tov is Bina. Shabbos is Chochmah. And Keser is Yom Kippur and Shavuos. B'Bechukosei Arech, I'm Mevatikim Mamish, the revelation of Keser B'Zoh, Kemevuah, B'Priyetz Chanin, like it's explained in Kabbalah. And therefore, on Shavuos, the godliness which is revealed is coming into this world, and at the same time what's coming into this world is the Eisei Hakika, godliness at the level of Ein Seif. And he explains, Kikol Yemei HaSfira, the duration of Sfira Se'emer, Hu Agdol HaSamech in Dezah, is by broadening the Midas of Seiderish Talshlus, of Atzilus, of Zah, Bashla, Masmeichen Dava, by adding a wholeness and a peacefulness and a correctness. In the Meichen of Chachma Bina Mislapshem Bizah, which join with Zah, godless Rishon and godless Chanin. I don't know what this means, godless Rishon and godless Chanin, but I'm assuming it's going to mean godless of Eimah and godless of Abba, godless of Bina and godless of Chachma, which is explained in the third chelik of Ayin Beis. It's different madregas of godless. Godless is a long, involved, and deep conversation, and the Sfiras Eimah preparation affects that when you get to Shavuos, there should be not only godless of Eimah, there should be also the meaning of godless Abba. I don't want to explain to you godless, but I'm just going to tell you a word. There was a chassid by the name of Chaim Yena Lutzki, and I had opportunity recently to read quite a bit about him. Chaim Yena died at 32 years old. Chaim Yena was a godless Rebbe G'deilim. Chaim Yena is a mystery. The Tem Chatmimim produced so many great Tmimim. But Chaim Yena was not really in Lubavitch, he was in Tzedrin. In other words, he was the tail end of Lubavitch. His mashpia was Shaul Dave Zislin in Tzedrin. And this Shaul Dave Zislin once visited the Rebbe Rashab in Lubavitch, and the Rebbe Rashab commented that I'm getting letters from your Talmidim with questions as they were the Chassidim from the Alten Rebbe. And he was referring to this of Chaim Yena. Chaim Yena was Makur of Chassidus through a number of Tmimim, but he exceeded them all. He had a moidendik neshama, unbelievable neshama. And he would daven bariches, and although it looked like he was crying and he was so forbidden, it was in a state of tainug, in a state of dvekas. I don't know how to tell the story because it's very vague, but at a certain point, he changed. He became a very, very different person. And the Rebbe Rashab told him explicitly that he achieved the madrega of Meichen de Gadlus. Meichen de Gadlus basically means that the heart should feel what the mind understands, which means that the heart and the mind should have no bridge, should have no meitzar agor, no division. Whatever the brain understands, the heart feels. So on the one hand, the heart becomes very detailed, very subtle, like the brain is. And on the other hand, the emotions that the heart experiences are unbelievably deep and quiet. And the Rebbe Rashab told Chaim Yena when he achieved this madrega of Meichen de Gadlus that he has to become a nister. In other words, the way I understand the story, as great as Teimchet Tmimim was, and as incredible as some of the great Tmimim were, people like Shilim and David Aradokir, and other great Oivdim that we know about, the Rebbe Rashab told Chaim Yena that he's on a different level. And he had to become a nister, he had to hide. So from then on, he would play all kinds of games. He would lay in bed and think Chassidus all day long, and make believe he was asleep, but they'd touch his pillow and it was saturated with tears. As a married man, he would come around where the Younger Light were, and he would have tickets to the theater and say, does anybody want to join me in the theater? He took his wife to the theater. This was all ways of being a nister. And to Chassidim, it was very strange, because when he had been younger, he was a Chassidishe Parsha, and he was very earnest. And then there was this sudden change, and apparently this change happened because the Rebbe Nishma Satan told him he reached the madrega of Meichen. The Meichen, the godless madrega of Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, Mamish. And the Hayom Yom you have Rabbi Moshe Valenker, that he worked for so many years at Oizke Haravet Meichen the Gadlus, and then he worked some more years at Oizke Haravet Meichen the Chanim, which by the way may be the difference between godless Rishon and godless Sheni. I'm godless of Meichen the Eim and godless of Meichen the Abba, but I'm not going into it. The point is, an incredibly high madrega. He passed away very, very young. He was an incredibly great Tomim. But Sfiras Ha'eimir is the time of godless HaMeichen, until when it comes Shavuos, Ach B'Shavuos, Mer Bebechinas Kol Galt. Shavuos not only is the heart a vessel for everything the mind has to offer, on Shavuos the crown itself is revealed. Shubechinas HaKeseh Shemekab Me'arach V'Atek Mamish. On Shavuos is the revelation of the Ein Sof itself. What does that mean? It means it's revelation of Torah, and it makes no sense. Not it makes no sense because it isn't sensible. It makes no sense because it hasn't even begun to descend to the madrega of Panim V'Yachid. In order to understand the Torah, there has to be an intellectual dimension. In order for there to be an intellectual dimension, there has to be a separation between the light and the life, between the inner and the outer dimensions of Torah, which is called in Kabbalah a hakah, a smash, which causes a separation. But the way the Torah is madrega of Kesed, it's all oil, it's all godliness, it's higher than Seichel completely. Says the Alter Rebbe on line 381, V'oz dafka nitnu shnei luches. And on Shavuos, we got the two Luchos, Shebehem Aseres HaDibros, we have the 10 Commandments. And the Aseres HaDibros are this Madrega of Eises HaChakika. It's the Torah, which will eventually descend to a level where you and I can learn it and understand it. But as it's written in the Aseres HaDibros, it's pure godliness. Al-Kain, and therefore, that's why the writing on the stones was carved into the stone. Bechinas Eises HaChakika, carved letters. So appreciate the 2 points. Since the light was such a high madrega of light, therefore the oisius, the letters, the vessels that had to carry that light had to correspondingly be very great. Since the light, whereas the light which was made on Shavuos is from Kesed, so the keli, the oisius, the vessels which could conduct that light had to also be from the madrega of Kesed, which is the idea of goliv gelifu b'tehidu ilah, which was last week's class. That it's carved into Tehidu Ilah. There's something called Tehidu Ilah, which is pure light. And within that light, you have potential oisius carved into it. But the oisius, the letters, are not at all separate from the light. Similarly, the Aseres HaDibros revealed a light of Ein Sof on vessels which were suited to receive the Ein Sof, because the vessel are not at all separate from the light itself. As opposed to the written Torah, which is Atzilus, and the oral Torah, which is the lower 3 worlds, the Bria, Tzir, and Asiyah. So the Rebbe begins on line 386. Fa'ata nove labiyat apostol in Bechukosei telechu. Now we go back to Bechukosei, and I'm going to leave this for next week in Mitzvah Hashem. But what did we learn about in Bechukosei telechu? In Bechukosei telechu means that Yid can serve Hashem many madregas, and the whole point of this Maamar is, if you want to become a mahalach, you have to serve Hashem on the level of chakika. In order to grow, to move from place to place, and from level to level, which is greater than the level of malach, because you're moving, and malachim are standing still, even though malachim are making great strides. There has to be a level of avodah that has to do with mesiras nefesh, and the depth within the Yiddish neshama, which calls it out, which extracts it, which motivates it, is the madrega of Teheri, as you'll see it inside the Maamar. Gol of Galifa B'Tehidu Ilah, the madrega within neshama is one with God.